Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking on the case of the missing casing stones. If you've ever looked at the great monuments of ancient Egypt, you've probably asked yourself a pretty fundamental question about how they actually look. Well, we are embarking on a chronological investigation to uncover exactly what happened to those stunning exteriors. Okay, let's dive into this. Where did the smooth outer shells of the pyramids go? Just ponder the sheer scale of that question for a second. Today, we're so used to seeing these stepped, rugged, sandy-colored cores that we almost completely forget they were originally wrapped in perfectly smooth limestone and even dark, highly polished granite. I mean, we're talking about millions of tons of precision-cut material here. To understand how these absolute marvels were built, we actually have to understand how they were dismantled. And hey, this isn't just ancient history, it's actually an active crisis. Over 1,000 casing stones have fallen off the bent pyramid in just the last century alone. That's a staggering rate of about one stone lost every single month. So the crucial point is, the remaining evidence on these monuments is literally degrading by the day. If we don't figure out how these stones are failing, we're going to lose the vital clues needed to preserve them forever. To piece together this giant puzzle, we need to visit our first historical crime scenes. Section 1, Buried by Debris and Time. We're looking at the early pyramids of Djoser and Meidum. So there was a major, somewhat controversial recent restoration of Djoser's stepped pyramid. It completely altered its ancient appearance, but it actually revealed something incredibly counterintuitive about preservation. It turns out that debris traps corrosive salt, damaging the lowest stones. Now, you'd naturally expect that buried stones would be, perfectly protected from the elements, right? But in reality, when stones are covered by their own collapsed limestone debris, that debris acts as a chemical agent, rapidly accelerating the stone's decay. Basically, clean sand protects, but debris destroys. Which brings us over to Meidum, a site that was plundered for its stone basically throughout history. The famous Egyptologist Flinders Petrie actually left us this vivid eyewitness testimony warning. To have left it open would have been to ensure its destruction in 6 months. The Pyramid of Meidum is the quarry of all the neighborhood. Get this, he literally had to rebury the pyramid's temple right after excavating it just to keep the locals from completely destroying it. Meidum was systematically quarried from the top down. But there's a deep irony here. The massive debris piles created by all that human plundering actually ended up covering the bottom third of the pyramid. So they inadvertently protected those lowest stones from being stolen. Pretty crazy, right? All right, so we've seen human scavengers at work. But as we transition to our next suspects, we're facing Section 2, Physics, the invisible destroyer. We are uncovering the mystery at the red and bent pyramids. Now, we know Meidum was actively quarried top-down, which left behind these thin, stratified debris layers. But the Red Pyramid, it tells a very different story. Historical drawings actually show a completely random patchwork loss across all its faces, which proves stones fell naturally way before any scavengers got to them. Think about it. Scavengers simply don't risk their lives plucking out random stones from high up when they just don't have to. So this proves the stones here detached and fell naturally, well before the locals merely scavenged him right off the desert floor. So what exactly caused them to fall naturally? Well, the culprit is a highly compelling scientific explanation known as thermal expansion. That's the physical phenomenon where stones expand and push outward due to heat absorption. And guys, this is the hidden key to so much of the damage we see across Egypt. And this brilliantly illustrates the physics of these massive monuments. Let's walk through it step by step. Step 1. These deep casing stones, some running a massive 2 meters into the pyramid, absolutely bake in the Egyptian sun and absorb intense heat. Step 2. They physically expand, and because of the massive pressure, they push outward toward the corners of the pyramid. Finally, step 3. The pressure just becomes way too much, the stones bulge, detach, and ultimately fall off the structure entirely on their own. Just boom, gravity takes over. If you look closely at the bent pyramid today, you're going to see these enormous patches cut into the stone. And there are 2 distinct perspectives on why this is. First, Egyptologist Mark Lehner's theory suggests that ancient builders accidentally broke the edges with sledgehammers during construction, and then they had to patch their own mistakes. Conversely, a thermal expansion analysis reveals that these large patches directly and precisely correlate to the exact areas where the casing stones bulged from heat stress. Okay, let's pivot our explainer now to the most famous monuments on Earth, the Giza Plateau. Section 3, the Great Giza Heists. We're moving from the slow, invisible decay of physics to centuries of systematic thievery at the world's most famous monuments.
It's fascinating because centuries of testimonies from early explorers map out these incredibly specific historical windows of theft. Between 1336 and 1395, the Great Pyramid is stripped halfway up using tackle and ropes. Then, a couple of centuries passed, and between 1591 and 1611, Menkawer's dark granite casing is completely dismantled. Finally, Khafre loses its smooth limestone exterior in an incredibly tight, just 8-year window between 1670 and 1678.
Now, all this plundering creates some incredibly confusing moments for early historians. Take John Greaves. He traveled to Egypt in 1639, completely expecting to see dark granite after reading descriptions from the ancient Greeks. But when he arrived, he was totally baffled. He wrote, "For they have mistaken both in the quality of the stone and color of the pyramid, for the whole pyramid seems to be of clear and white stone." He seriously thought the ancient writers were just making things up. He completely misunderstood that the dark granite casing had, quite literally, just been stolen by stone thieves a few decades prior, revealing that bright white limestone core underneath.
But wait, there is a massive plot twist in our investigation here. The 1664 Jean de Thevenot sketch of Khafre proves that thermal expansion damage occurred before the stone thieves ever arrived. See, de Thevenot drew the pyramid just years before its casing stones were stolen, and his highly accurate sketch distinctly shows missing stones at the high corners and these large cracks bulging right in the center. That is the exact footprint of thermal expansion. It proves Khafre was failing from physics long before the human thieves ever showed up on the scene.
Which brings us to a really fascinating question about the builders themselves. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final revelation regarding ancient engineering. Section 4. An ancient engineering pivot. Did the Egyptians actually learn from their mistakes? Consider the difference in their design. The early 4th Dynasty giants, like the Great Pyramid and Khafre, were built with solid, tightly fitted backing stones. Because they were so rigid and literally couldn't breathe, the casing bulged and cracked, resulting in a super high susceptibility to damage. Later pyramids, however, featured a loose rubble core. For years, people just assumed this was a cheaper, lazier way to build. But what if it was a genius engineering pivot? A loose rubble core actually allows the entire structure to expand and contract safely with the intense heat, making it incredibly resistant to thermal stress. It is highly probable the Egyptians witnessed the thermal damage on their early giants and deliberately adapted their methods. Real game-changer stuff. We've tracked the physics, we've documented the timelines, and we know exactly when those massive Giza heists occurred. But that leaves us with one final lingering mystery. Where are the missing casing stones today? I mean, thousands upon thousands of massive granite and bright white limestone blocks were hauled away in various specific historic windows. They didn't just vanish into thin air. Which historic mosques, which grand medieval walls, or which modern buildings in Cairo might secretly be holding the stolen stones of Khafre and Menkaure right now? Look closely the next time you walk the streets of the city. The answers might be hidden right in plain sight.